Hey, hey, hey. So nice to be on this Joker again. Hopefully offline next year, but this year we're online. And yes, I think the program that we have is just awesome. And I'm really, really happy to welcome on the very first day my good friend and my colleague now, by the way. So we're colleagues, yes, from Oracle, directly from Basel. Switzerland. So Andres Almiray, hello, my friend, and how are you?
Hi, Dimitri. I'm really happy to be here, and I wish that I can give you a real hug, but a virtual one will have to suffice for these days.
Yes, unfortunately. So once again, wish everybody be safe and says do what your government says. Trust your government. So and then next time we will be offline with you. So Andres, you're gonna talk about JReleaser, which is like a super cool tool, I guess, for everybody.
Yes, that is correct. JReleaser is one of my latest open source projects. It's a tool that promises and will deliver much better experience when working with your release process.
Yes, because it's not just writing software. It has to be somewhere and it has to be correctly released. Okay, so I'm really impatient to see how JReleaser will help us. Once again, I will say to the audience that please write your questions. Don't hesitate. I'll be there. You can write them in any language. I mean, I will translate them. So we have agreed with Andres that I will interrupt him. So it means whenever you have questions, just write me down and I will do the job. So Andres, thank you so much for being with us, and we are impatient to hear about JReleaser. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. So we can go for the slides. All right, perfect. So let's get started into the topic. So my name is Andres Almiray, and as like Dimitri said, we're both colleagues. We both currently are employed by Oracle, and though he's working with the Helidon team, I'm working with the database team. And one of the things that I do on my day job is talk about the different open source projects that we have at Oracle related to the database. If there is something that will interest you, I will be very happy to talk to you about those things. But what we're going to see today is completely unrelated to my employer. This is an open source project that is not related to Oracle. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, how this tool came to be, the reasons of being, so that we understand why the tool works like it does and where it could go into the future, okay? So as many of the things that I do on my own time, my free time, is keep working in open source projects. And I've been doing this for years, and I like to write any kind of applications and tools like these ones and others. Now, for a time, I was working on a desktop application written with a JavaFX. Now, writing the desktop app with JavaFX is a straightforward task. And as a software engineer, once that I build the binary, once that I build the application, what I want is for users to be able to see it and to consume it, right? So as a software engineer, what do? We just create some package, some binary, put it on a page, and hope that our users discover the application and start using it. But as it so happens, if you look at the other side of the equation from the user's perspective, it's not enough for them to simply say, hey, there's some random page out there that has a jar file or a set of jar files or a zip file, and then somehow download it and install it in such a way that it feels like a native to the platform they're currently using. They will prefer to use some other tools, such as, for example, a specific platform packager. If you are on OS X or Mac, then you might prefer to use Homebrew. If you're on Linux, maybe it's Snapcraft or Flatpak or something else. If you're on Windows, maybe it's Chocolatey or Scoop or Winget. So there are many options. It's not just jars as we will see them as Java developers. And in order to create these platform packages, you need additional files, additional metadata, like manifests, like Ruby formulas, like many other things. And these files, these additional elements, may be created based on metadata originating from your project. If you were only caring about Homebrew, creating a Ruby formula is not that hard, but you need to know a little bit of Ruby, you need to know the syntax for the formula, and you need how to put it into a Git repository that follows certain guidelines. Or if you want to put it in homebrew core, then you need to follow much more stringent guidelines. And I'm just talking about one package manager. What if you wanted to provide your binaries in more than one package manager? So you had to learn new things and do it all over again every time that you create a new release. Sometimes the users would like to see documentation and information about the release that you just posted, like release notes or a changelog. This information can be harvested directly from the source control or again from additional metadata that exists on your project. So all these things are somewhere reachable to us, but automating our way into releasing all those things, into building all those different package managers and artifacts and whatnot can take some time. So that was me 2 years ago, trying to figure out what to do in order to release a very trivial JavaFX application. And trying to figure out those things left me scratching my head a little bit, like, well, I don't know exactly what to do. So I put a pause on it. I look at other projects for inspiration. So it so happens that the inspiration came from 2 different projects. One is known as JReleaser, and another is known as JBang. A few years ago, I also started working with the Go programming language, and I wrote a very small, simple command line utility called GUM. And I faced the same problems. So once I built a binary for a particular platform, I wanted to deploy it in such a way or publish it in such a way that the users will be able to consume it. Instead of just pushing the source and hoping that people will download the source and compile the Go code into the specific platform, I would prefer if I were to compile all the binaries for all the particular platforms that I want to target and then make those binaries available to users. JReleaser does that. And not only that, it can calculate checksums, it can sign the files, it can publish to many different package managers, and recently also has the capability to announce a release to, let's say, Twitter, Slack, and a few other things. So this is the tool that when I saw it, it's like, I want that for Java. But sadly, it is not. It's only for Go. And now JBang. JBang is a CLI tool that started, the first release was posted on December 2019 or so. And the JBang is kind of like the CLI that you never knew you wanted for Java. It's kind of like JShell, but with steroids, so you can define dependencies. You can have self-contained Java scripts. They are Java source files, but they behave like a scripting, so that you can launch a full Java program with all the dependencies, and it happens to be just one source file. It can also launch jars from the network. It has so many features. But the point is that the author, Max Anderson, he also wanted users to be able to consume the JBang binaries for many different places. So he's using Gradle, and he built a bunch of scripts and bash scripts to publish JBang to many different package managers and whatnot. So one day, he and I were talking, and he told me that he spent so much time making JBang publish to many different places. And I told him, well, I did this for my Go application with JReleaser, and it was a snap. It was just one source file for configuration, and it was done. So it dawned on us that what if we were able to combine both projects, something like works like JReleaser, but for Java, something that uses the lessons learned from JBang, but for any kind of project. Because if you were to look at JBang a few months ago, if you wanted to do everything that JBang did, you have had to copy and paste and make a lot of modifications because it was exclusive to JBang, the way that it was built. So based on these 2 ideas, that's how we came to this project called JReleaser. It's a tool that allows you to create Git releases, to publish binaries, to announce releases, and so many other things, inspired by both JReleaser and JBang. So this is basically it. You keep using the same build tools that you already know and love. Maybe it's Apache Ant, maybe it's Apache Maven, maybe it's Gradle, maybe it's something else. It does not matter what it is. As long as you use these build tools to create some sort of inputs that belong to something that we can call a release. It could be just maybe a POM file, if that's what you want to release. It could be a zip file that contains the binaries. It could be a single jar. It could be a few things that we're going to talk about in a moment. You supply those inputs to JReleaser, plus a model of your release is just one source file, one additional source file that tells JReleaser where are the things that you want to release and where exactly. And what JReleaser will give you as a result is the possibility to create a Git release on popular Git services such as GitHub, Gitlab, and Gitlab. It can create package managers or platform-specific packages such as Homebrew, Snapcraft, Chocolatey, and Scoop for your project. And it can also announce when a release is posted in many different channels. The most typical ones could be Twitter, SDK Man, Slack, and a few others, right? So how does it do? Well, at its core, JReleaser started as a template engine, a file template engine that will generate all those metadata files required for publishing to Homebrew, such as the formula or a manifest for Scoop, or even a Docker image if you want to publish, a Docker file if you want to create Docker images. If you were to look at JReleaser, it only allows you to do things in like one block. You configure it and it says do everything. There's no way that you can interrupt it or do something, just a small set of pieces. If you want that kind of behavior, then you can invoke the orange command called full release. This does everything for you. But if you only care about creating the Git release and nothing more, then you can use the blue column that will calculate the changelog based on the commits. It will calculate the checksum of the files, any inputs files that you may define. It can sign the files with PGP. It can upload those files to other places besides the Git release as Git release assets. And finally, create the Git release with the tag and the changelog, the body, and the assets. The next column is the one that can create the platform packages, such again, Homebrew, Scoop, Chocolatey, Docker. So the step for the prepare is where it creates, it bootstraps the basic files based on templates that already exist in the tool, but you can supply your own templates if you want to. The package is where it actually creates the binary for the package in case that is needed. For example, in Docker, it creates the Docker image out of the Docker file. And for Homebrew, there's nothing next to be done. It's just commit to a Git repository. And that's exactly what happens in the publish stage, is where we make these package managers be available. So in publish is where we send the Docker image to Docker Hub or any Docker registry that you may have configured. Is where we push the formula to the Homebrew tab repository, or is where we publish other metadata files to the other repositories that are needed. Finally, in the announce block is where simply says, I'm going to announce a particular release. So depending on your release process, you may want to use everything in one go, or just pick and select the items that you want to use. So you can invoke every single one of these commands separate from one another. And even though I said that JReleaser expects your binaries to be created by external means, there are currently two additional options for you to assemble binaries. You may create native executables using GraalVM native image. If you're using something like, I don't know, Spring Boot, Macron, Quarkus, Helidon, or something else that already has integration with GraalVM, you can continue to use that things, and that will create the executable. But if you do not have that, and you will wishing to create some sort of native executable, then JReleaser can do that for you. Given the constraints that GraalVM has, you must run the generation on a very specific node. So you must run it for Linux if you want to use Linux or Docker. If you want to generate executable for Windows, you must run it on a Windows box. And if you want to have a binary for macOS, then you have to run it on a macOS box, right? There's no cross-compilation. But once you do, once you collect all the artifacts, you can go into the next step, which is the release process. The other kind of binaries that you can also build with JReleaser are JLink images. But not only any regular JLink image, you can also have cross-platform JLink images. That is, if I'm currently on a MacBox, like you can see here, I can still generate custom Java runtimes for Windows or for Linux in the same node. This is because the way that the JLink accepts the parameters, you can supply an additional JDK that does not need to match the one for the current platform that you're running on. So JReleaser allows you to build those kind of things or assemble those binaries besides being able to release them. I already mentioned a few services, but here's the full gamut of all the integrations that the tool has at the moment. If you want to create a Git release, then you can release to GitHub or GitHub Enterprise, to GitLab or GitLab Enterprise, or to your own Gitia instance. And Codeberg is a website, it's a service currently hosted somewhere here in Europe that also gives access to Gitia-based Git services. So, well, we suppose though. And if you happen to use any other service, any other Git service, you may use our generic Git support, although you cannot use the full release capabilities because for that, we will require a specific API integration to that service. So that may be coming in the future. If you want to upload artifacts to other locations besides a Git release, then you can send it to a JFrog Artifactory. It's just point it to a generic repository on JFrog Artifactory and you're done. Or it may be an HTTP or HTTPS server that you wrote. It's a custom server that as long as it supports a put or post, then JReleaser can send you the binaries. Or you may want to push it to a bucket on AWS S3. Yeah, because why not? In terms of package managers, I already mentioned Homebrew, which works for OS X and Linux, Chocolatey for Windows. We can generate Docker images. We can also generate JVM catalogs, allowing you to launch an application or a jar across the network. Scoop is like Homebrew, but for Windows. SDKman is a very popular package manager that allows you to install binaries for all major platforms or universal, which will work on any kind of platform as long as there's some Java on it. And finally, Snapcraft is for Linux. And in case of distribution channels or announcing channels, well, we have plenty of options. Most popular ones are Twitter and Slack. And you can also send it to, Gitter, Google Chat. We just added support for Telegram. And if the option that you're looking for is not currently listed here, and as long as that option supports incoming webhooks, then you can use our webhooks integration. But if nothing will be available, I will certainly encourage you to send those to open a ticket and let us know that maybe there's some integration to another service that may be needed. So in terms of inputs, the inputs that you build, the things that you supply to JReleaser to make all these things work. The most basic one is a binary distribution that you package either as a zip or a tarball. A binary distribution must follow a specific file structure. Typically, there's a bin directory that contains the executable or the launcher script for the particular platform. And there might be a lib directory with all the additional jars. There may be, license, readme, any kind of supporting files needed for the application to work. And so far, we've been talking about Java. But given that the binary distribution is just the file structure, JReleaser also supports the capabilities of releasing not just Java executables or Java applications, but also non-Java. So when you're working with Rust or Perl or Python or JavaScript and you build some kind of binary and you would like to release it, you can use JReleaser for that. If you're building binary with Go, I would still suggest you to keep using GoReleaser because there are a few things that GoReleaser does that are exclusive to Go. But if it's not the case, then you can certainly use JReleaser. Or maybe you're packaging your application as an Uber jar, a fat jar that contains all dependencies and is executable. Yeah, we support that too. For obvious reasons, we support JLink and GraalVM native image distributions because JReleaser can help you build those kind of things. And finally, the native package or native installer, these are files that allow you to install an application that are specific to a platform. For example, in the case of Mac, it happens to be a DMG or PKG. In case of Windows, it's an MSI or .exe file. And in case of Linux, this is typically a Debian or RPM file. You may create these files with any tools. You may use JPackage if you want to, but as long as you have these input files, you may be able to release them with JReleaser. How do you launch the tool? There are a handful of ways, depending on your operating system. If you are on Mac, my preferred way is to use SDKman, because this will download the binaries and just set up all the required environmental variables and the paths and everything, just handles things perfectly. But you can also use JBank to launch the latest version, or you may use Homebrew, of course, because you're Mac. And if neither of these options look appealing to you, then you can go into the release page of the project and then download either of these two files. The first one is the universal distribution that expects you to have a specific version of Java to launch it. It's Java 8, so everybody has that. And the second one, the standalone version, this is a cross-platform custom Java runtime generated with JLink. That means you don't need any additional Java. It just comes in with the zip file. Just unzip and start using it. For Linux, it's pretty much the same options as the command, JBank, or Homebrew, or download the specific zip file, for which we have two flavors of the standalone version. One is for systems that have been compiled with glibc, such as Ubuntu, and the second one is where things have been compiled with Muscle. This is typically Linux Alpine. Finally, for Windows, it's like I'm repeating myself, SDKman, JBank, in this case now it's a scoop instead of Homebrew. And again, two additional zip files that you may download, the universal one or the standalone one for Windows. You may also use a very simple Java source file. It's kind of like a Java script that knows how to locate a particular version of JReleaser given as an input, download the jar file, and launch it. For this to work, you need Java 11 because the jar file that you download is compiled with a Java 11 bytecode as a minimum. But other than that, you pass in the same parameters as before, and you should be able to execute the project without any problems. Or maybe you are interested in running it from Docker, for which we offer two options. The first image is based on Ubuntu, and the second image is based on Linux Alpine. Those are the options for running it as a CLI tool. But you may also run it as a Maven plugin, or as a set of end tasks, or as a Gradle plugin. So we cover most of the major bases whenever you want to use the tool in one way or another. If you want to run it on a CI/CD server, certainly you can do so. And we have in guides for all these different services. There is a specific support for GitHub Actions. There is a release action that can read the configuration files and takes all the inputs and just creates a release for you. And the GitLab CI typically uses Docker images, and the Docker images that we produce for JReleaser are aware of the specifics for running within GitLab CI. So you can use it as is. There's no need for you to create another Docker image just to have JReleaser be run inside GitLab CI. Okay, so that's enough of the theory. We can jump into the demo. So I'm going to show a very simple example. Oh, we should keep this running. I'm going to show a very simple example and how we can do things, and we will add a few more progressions on what can be done with a particular tool. So I have here, I'm showing a very simple Maven-based project. It's a CLI tool. It's a CLI application that prints out hello world. There's nothing fantastic about this. And the first thing that I want to show is that every single commit message, except the first one, uses a specific prefix. Now, this convention is exclusive to the project, has nothing to do with JReleaser. But I do mention it because JReleaser will be able to make something out of that. We'll be able to reuse this kind of convention and do something better when we create a release. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a release in the most basic way. How do we do that? Well, the first thing that we need to figure out is, do we have JReleaser installed? I do, but I just want to make sure which are the current versions. And we have 7 releases currently working on the last snapshot that's going to come out at the last weekend of October, so at the end of this month. So we're going to use version 07, and we can ask JReleaser for its version to figure out if we are actually using that particular version. Yes, we are. Okay, so here's a project. And even though there's a JReleaser file there that contains the model of our project, I'm not going to use it right now. So I'm just going to use the source files as they are. So I'm going to use the following command, JReleaser release, and I'm going to say, I want you to auto-configure the release based on metadata from your project, which is the current directory and the Git metadata available on .git. So that's like what is the remote, what is the username, what is the owner, stuff like that. So I only need to pass in additional data such as what is the current version that I want to release. So that will be version 100. And I click enter. JReleaser tells me a few things about my project, and because I'm interacting with GitHub, I need some sort of credentials or something known as a GitHub token. Now, when you do this on GitHub Actions, this token is usually provided as part of the secrets. Here, we also have some secrets. They are found in this file, in this location, currently using the TOML file format, but it could be YAML or it could be JSON. And this is where you can find all the secrets that I have locally available in my machine. If this file did not exist, JReleaser will expect secrets to be existing as environmental variables. If neither the file nor the variables exist, then JReleaser will fail. Obviously, there are no secrets, there are no inputs. So what we see in this printout is that JReleaser saw some information about our project, so it has the right version, it's not a snapshot, this is the current timestamp, and that is the latest hash. It's not dry run, so it's going to do things for real. Calculates a checksum, calculates a changelog, does not calculate checksums because there are no input files, does not sign anything because, again, no input files, and there are no uploads because, again, no input files, and creates a release on that URL. So we go here and do a refresh, and now notice that I do have a release. Released just a minute ago. So it has a title, it is the latest, has a tag, has the list of all the commits, and that's it, nothing more. But of course, we can do better with just getting started. Let's add a bit more flavor to it. Let's try to do some formatting, and also let's add some assets. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to build a project. So invoke Maven, and this will create some binaries that I want to release. We can see there is a tar.gc file and a zip file. Perfect. So I'm going to ask JReleaser to do the release again. And now I'm going to say changelog formatted. So I'm going to add that option. And I'm going to pass a file. So that should be double dash file. The file should be target distributions app zip file. Now, if I do this right now, the release is going to fail. And why is it going to fail? Because it will try to overwrite the existing release, version 100. By default, we do not allow this to happen. So if you want to overwrite an existing release, then do so. Tell it, JReleaser, that you want to overwrite this release. Here we go. Now we activate this. Notice that now it did the uploading. It did not recalculate the checksums because it did it on the previous run. So it kind of has a little bit of a smart caching because no input changed, so no need to change the checksums. So if you go back here to our release and do a refresh, now the change starts to look a little bit better. And I do have now the name of the contributor, and I do have those assets. So that's pretty good. Okay. But again, we can keep doing things better. Now let's make use of the model. So I'm going to show you the JReleaser input file. This is a file that contains description about your project, such as what is the name of the application, where is the URL where you can see it, authors, license, and some metadata, which will be very useful when we want to generate those platform packages, such as the homebrew formula. Next, we see on the release block that we definitely want to release to GitHub, that we want to overwrite every time that we make a release, so just in case. that we want to sign commits and tags that we create, that we're going to link our release to a discussion. Currently, there is a category called announcements that every project has, so we're going to keep it there. And some information about the changelog. What's important is that for every commit, we're going to match the title. And if it has this particular regular expression, this is like a prefix. If it finds the prefix, it's going to give it a label right now, just locally. And then based on these labels, task, issue, and feature, we'll apply a series of categories. So features, issues, and tasks. And the final thing that I'm going to do is remove the prefix at the end. So this is actually a search and replace operation, and by default, the replace is empty. So the net effect is that it removes the prefix. I'm also going to sign all the input files that I'm given, and I'm going to create a homebrew formula. And these are the two input files that I have, the C file and the targc file.
By the way, Andres, so we have a question. Is XML supported as a configuration format, or it's YAML only?
It's not YAML only. We'll get into that. There are more formats for sure, yes. If you don't like YAML, I am with you. I feel your pain. So that's why we provide other formats as well.
Okay. Well, answer comes shortly, yes? Okay.
So you can see in this file, there's plain text, but there are also these things that look very interesting. This file is actually a mustache template, or can reuse mustache templates. So these are, think of them as variable names. This name resolves to app, and project version resolves to the current project version, right? Which I haven't not set in this file. Okay, so let's see. We have the build, we have the binaries, so that's good. So now I can go and say JReleaser pull release. I'm going to use another command, which is going to create the git release, do the package managers, and do any announcements that may be configured. So here we go. There's no auto configure anymore on. Calculate the checksums, that's good. It signs all the artifacts, that's good. It uploads to GitHub, perfect, and then creates or starts to prepare the homebrew package until it finally publishes to this particular repository. There were no announcers configured, so that's why we don't have that thing. And in case that something were to go wrong and you want to figure out, oh, well, there is an exception somewhere, there is a file called tracelog. It's always generated. And you can see metadata about the tool itself, what is the latest version that I'm using, what is the hash, and the debug statements that everything happened while JReleaser was doing his work, such as the full model evaluation. If you want to know everything that JReleaser takes into consideration to create a release, well, here it is in all its glory. And finally, at some point at the end, we see more debug statements. So this is, if something were to fail, here's where you can see that. Anyway, there's one thing that you might be wondering. I did not give the version number of the project. It was not given in the command line, and it was not specified on the release YAML file. So where is it? It is in my environmental variables. So this is the value that was taken. So you can mix and match. You can put it on the file and update it every time you need it, or you can put it on an environment variable. You can put it in many other places. So what happens now here? I go back into the release and do a refresh. And look how this thing looks like now. Now I have need categories. The prefix is gone. I also have the link to the username. I was able to link it. And here are all the different binaries. So here's my binary and the signature, another binary, the signature, the checksums, and the signature for the checksum. So you can be really, really sure that no one has tampered with this. Here you can see there is a button called Join Discussion. We go into that one, we click on it, and there is a discussion in this project that is related to the release. And now you can react to it and comment on it. It's just one of the nice features that were added. But remember that we also created a homebrew formula, right? And that is in this repository, homebrew tab. Was just updated this formula. If this repository did not exist, JReleaser will create it for you. And we see the formula based on a template, which points to the URL of the latest version that we just released and the same checksum. If you want to add other things to this template, then there's plenty of options for configuration that I didn't show, or you can also supply your own basic template, and then JReleaser will be happy to do things. So this is how it works for GitHub, but I'm not done yet. I have the same source set hosted on GitLab, the same project with only 2 changes. So I'm gonna go into the terminal and switch into that project. Oh, that's not the command I want, but this one. Yep. Here's the same project as before. And I can show you that the model looks different in 2 ways. First, we're going to release to GitLab. And second, there is no discussion category because that is a GitHub only feature. But the rest of the configuration file is pretty much identical. All right? So let's invoke Maven and build it so that we create the binaries, the distributions. There we have it, the targc and the zip file. Now I can issue the same command as before. So I'm going to go through the history so you can see it's exactly the same command as before and invoke it. And we'll see what happens again. It takes the secrets from the right place, calculates the checksums, do the sign-in, starts to upload the assets to the right repository on GitLab, and then it will create the homebrew formula in a particular repository. So we go here, and notice that there are no tags. I'm going to do a refresh. Now there's a tag. I click on it and have a release. I click on it, and I see the release assets as we saw earlier on GitHub, and a similar changelog and the username. What happens with the formula? We just have to move into the Homebrew tab repository, whose formula was just updated a few seconds ago. We find the formula and look at the file. It's pretty much identical except for 2 changes: the URL that points to GitLab and the checksum, which is different. And I can also do the same thing for Codeberg. So there are no releases now. I'm going to switch into Codeberg. And here I do have 2 changes. One, like with GitLab, we now want to release to Codeberg. There's no discussion, obviously, because discussion is only GitHub. But the other thing that I'm going to do is create an announcer. And I'm going to announce to my custom Discord server. The integration with Discord works through incoming webhooks, and anyone that has access to the webhook will be able to post messages to that channel. So I'm treating that webhook URL as a secret. So it's part of those secret information that is found in config tom. But if you want to know if this is configured correctly, one thing that you can do is invoke the JReleaser config command. We need to build it first, so let's build it. So that's a good thing. So we do JReleaser config once again. Now that we see here, the model that was evaluated, so there is information about artifacts, but I want to go here a little bit upwards. Here is, in the announce block, we can see that Discord is enabled. The webhook is a secret, so it will never be displayed in plain text. And we know what is the default text, again, using mustache templates. That is going to be sent as part of the message. If you want to change this to something else, then certainly you can do so. All right? So we're good to go. We're going to use one more time the same command as before. That means we're going to use JReleaser full release. And then invoke this. And let's see what happens. The checksum signing, same thing as before. And finally, after everything has been created, there is an announcement. It looks like this. All right. Let's move into Codeberg and do a refresh, and you will see that now there's a release, a new one right there. That looks exactly like we did before. Here's the same categories and the assets. We can go into Homebrew tab And the formula looks pretty much identical to the others, except for, again, 2 changes, the URL and the checksum. So what about the announcement? Here's my Discord server, and I have this very basic message that was sent to me, and I click on the URL. It happens to navigate back to the release that I just posted. Now, of course, obviously what I've shown you is a project that may or may not have binaries, as we started early on. And then we have some binaries that we can publish. And there are many ways that you can use this tool. If you only care about the Git release, use it. If you care about just the package manager, use it, or just the announcement. So here's one thing that I can show you. The Moditech project is a set of a Java library and a Maven plugin. And it uses JReleaser to just create a Git release with a changelog. It does it in this way. They don't follow any prefixes, so there's only a handful of categories that have been matched at the moment. But it just looks like this. How they do that? They configure the Maven JReleaser plugin, which is found here. I believe at the bottom of the file, we're going to find the configuration for the JReleaser Maven plugin, latest version 0.7, matching the same version as the CLI. And the configuration that we see here is a Maven DSL. So for those people that ask, can I use XML? Yes, you can. Right now, not as a standard format, but as part of a Maven DSL. If you want to use XML as an external format, that we probably would have to come up with a real use case to use it, because otherwise, well, Maven DSL is right there. If you happen to use Maven, if you happen to use another tool, if you're using the CLI, well, we have to figure it out. But anyway, yes, you can have this. I have a handful of applications out there that can show you how you can use this tool in combination with others. For example, here is a very trivial Spring Boot CLI application. It's a regular Spring Boot. There's nothing extra, except that I want to generate native executable binaries using GraalVM native image. So I use the Spring Boot GraalVM integration for this. And the extra steps that I need to do is package that executable into a zip file that contains the right structure. And once I have that, I can release this with JReleaser. This particular application has set up everything here in the Maven POM. There are no additional files. So this is just regular Spring Boot. And the assembly plugin is the one that I'm going to use to create the zip file with the right structure. And then somewhere here is the JReleaser configuration, which again only configures the changelog. It doesn't do more here. And finally, you have, and now we have a distribution of type native image. By default is Java binary. And why do we have different types? Because depending on the type, you may have access to other package managers. So for example, JBank makes no sense for this kind of releases, but it does make sense for Java jars or for a Java binaries. What is a native image? Besides defining what is the path of the file that you want to release, you also need to define the correct platform, because otherwise things might not work. It may seem a little bit redundant here, but remember, this name is the one for the consumers, and this value here is for JReleaser to make sense that there are no duplicate artifacts for the same platform, something like that. So once you have this configured, and you push a release using GitHub Actions, then it looks like this. Again, configurable changelog, and the users, and all the binaries. And if Spring Boot is not the thing for you, well, same example, but using Micronaut, which results in a release very similar to this one. You don't like Micronaut or Spring Boot, you prefer Quarkus? That's fine. Here's a Quarkus application with the same configuration with Maven. And finally, a release, just like we saw earlier. Another question that people ask is, does JReleaser release itself? Because obviously you have to create a release for JReleaser. Well, the answer is yes. If you navigate to the project and you look into the releases, you will see something very similar as we saw earlier. We follow a different convention for our commits, so that's why it looks different. but we have categories on the changelog, and we have here the binaries. Now this standalone zip, these are custom Java runtimes, as I mentioned before, which are built, they're assembled using JReleaser itself. One more thing that I want to do before we go back to the slides is that if you navigate to the project, to the website, JReleaser.org, there's a documentation of everything that you may want to know about JReleaser, such as how to get started with the different options for using tool, command line, Maven, Gradle, or Ant. If you want to know more about the different options, for example, what can I do with a Maven plugin? Here's a list of all the goals and the properties, or the different commands that I have access to in the CLI. And notice the names. These names match every box that we saw in the workflow, plus a few other more. Initialize the external file, or initialize templates based for homebrew or announcements or something else. And everything else pretty much is the same, every command as we saw in the workflow. We have examples. There are examples for like documenting how exactly JReleaser releases itself, so that not just here's the file, but tells you why I'm doing things the way that it's done, or how you want to configure cross-platform with the 5 different formats we support, so YAML, TOML, JSON, Maven, or Gradle DSL. If you want to know how to configure something, for example, let's look at how that we configure Twitter for an announcement. So we'll click here, or you might search here for Twitter. And this shows you every single option that you have at your disposal in YAML, TOML, JSON, Maven, and Gradle. So every single bit of configuration that you require here in this site is written in the 5 different formats. So it should be very easy to just copy and paste and then adapt to your particular project. Okay, moving on, what's to expect in the future? We could be talking about additional Git releases. So it turns out that Bitbucket is still very popular. I conducted a poll, a Twitter poll, and for more than, it was 1,500 or so people that responded. Around 20% of them, so a little bit like 300 people said, oh yeah, I'm still using Bitbucket. So yeah, maybe it makes sense to support this tool in the future. We support uploading to Amazon S3, but there are more cloud providers out there. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we can upload to Azure or CI or many other cloud providers that we can be looking into the future. And just like JReleaser can create custom Java runtimes with JLink or native executables with GraalVM, it could also reuse the same project model that we exposed, the same metadata, to create platform installers using JPackage. So that's something that we're looking, I don't know if it's going to be released before 1.0 or a little bit after, given that you already have options with Maven and Gradle to create this or any additional tool. So it's not like we're not stopping you, but it makes things easier to bring most of the things together if we're able to assemble this with JReleaser and JPackage together. Here are some links that you may find interesting for the project. So the first one, JReleaser.org, is where you find the documentation, the full documentation of the project. Everything that you need to know about JReleaser is found there. If it's not there, then please let us know. You can file a ticket. You can even edit the website and send us a pull request very, very easily. It's already integrated in the website itself. The project is hosted on GitHub, the JReleaser organization. There are a few other projects that are related to JReleaser. So if you're interested to figure out what else is there, then of course feel free to roam around and investigate. And if you find something, there's an issue, well, that's the issue tracker where you can find it. If you happen to use the tool and find it useful for your work, and if your company feels like, oh, this is cool, well, feel free to sponsor the project. We have an open collective. And of course, we have a Twitter account where we post announcements or many other bits about the project. So if you have not contributed to open source before, it's very, very easy. You see a problem with anything that you saw today or any other open source project of dependency that you consume in your daily work, file a ticket. That's it. You don't have to do anything more. If you have the time and you have the passion, yeah, sure, you can supply source code, you can supply a test case, you can supply a patch. But you're not forced to do that. It's just by interacting with the team at the other side and create that ticket, let people know something's not working properly or something could be made better or there's a missing feature, whatever it is, right? Then that is plenty of help for an open source project. So right now in October, there is this initiative called Hacktoberfest that allows you to get additional kind of like prizes or swag or a t-shirt if you make contributions to open source projects. JReleaser is participating in Hacktoberfest, and one of the things that we're looking for is translations for our CLI tool, which has currently been translated to 10 different languages. We don't have Russian yet, so if someone will be happy to send us a translation of the CLI in Russian, that would be very helpful. And if you want to, you can also participate in Hacktoberfest if is that something that interests you. So with that, that's everything that I have for you today. I can certainly continue speaking for hours, but I guess we have some time for questions.
Oh, yes. So I'm back. Yes, actually, I do have some question by myself. Actually, the main question is, so you said it was like a template engine, but is it really like template engine still, or it's just like, the architecture of this thing is that it's more than just a template engine now at this point?
It started just as a template engine because the first thing that we added was the ability to create the homebrew formula, and then it was the scoop manifest. But then we figured out, oh, we need to calculate checksums. Do we assume that you do that with Ant, Maven, or Gradle, or we do it ourselves? The next thing is, it would be great to also upload signatures, PGP signatures for all these files. Now, again, do we expect you to know how to do that and configure that in the build tool, or should we do it ourselves? So we start to kind of like, there's a little bit of a gray area between responsibilities that belong to the build tool and responsibilities that belong to the release tool. So of course you can checksum and sign things externally, but if you let JReleaser do the work for you, then it has tighter integration. So it migrated from being a very simple file template engine into an execution engine that also happens to have a file template engine.
So, but technically, you just took one template engine, or you just wrote it yourself, actually?
We use Mustache as a template engine, as a format, and then everything around it. So how to locate the templates and how to define the variables, the names that go into the different braces, how to calculate additional values that may be added to the templates. That is part of the JReleaser proper.
But this is already a Java code.
Itself. Oh yes, fully Java code.
It's fully Java code. So does that actually mean that when you release CLI, do you build native image of it, or it's just a jar file actually?
The CLI doesn't release yet as a native executable for two reasons. One is that it will match that particular version of the binary to 3 different platforms: Mac, Linux, and Windows, and a very specific on Linux, because those are the kind of runners that we use in GitHub to create our binaries. And the second one is that I try to make it work with GraalVM, and there are still a few flags and features that I have to figure out to make it work properly, because even though the whole source code is written in Java, except for the Gradle plugin, which is written in static Ruby, and I try to minimize the use of reflection, there's still a few things a few hints that I need to tell to Graal, to the compiler, when it generates the executable.
So that means that actually that's a good idea to join for Hacktoberfest as well. Yes, just to help with this thing probably.
Yeah, that's another nice idea. So for the time being, the zip files that we produce for the CLI allows you to download the universal one, for which you require Java 8, download a standalone one which bundles a very specific Java, so you just run in with batteries included, or download the Uber jar, which is the one that requires a Java 11 as a minimum.
Okay, so, and by the way, I know that everybody knows Andres as well, not just as open source. He's the creator of Hack Garden, so we really want to get offline to hack it in a community offline, and maybe yes, hopefully this will be. We'll get there soon. I'm really tired of this thing happening. So, but once again, actually. So you just delight a lot of people getting a release engineer job, with this stuff, because definitely with one click you're doing automating one job actually technically.
Yeah, so. And something that may not have been obvious is that I created a handful of releases on GitHub, Gitlab, and Codeberg from my local environment. So let that sink in for a moment. It was just one single command because everything was configured.
All the configuration. So it actually took all the job from a release engineer, actually, automatically create everything and just delivered it.
Right. Now, of course, you can run these instructions on a CI server as well. But the advantage is that you can do like a dry run. Actually, JReleaser has a dry run mode that will check everything before it commits to the remote location. So you can see if the templates were generated correctly, if the Docker image was created correctly, all those things. You can do everything locally so that you don't have to run it on CI and see it fail, make a change, and iterate until this thing works. So now you are back in control in your local development environment to try out a release process up to a certain point, depending on your release process. If you want to automate as much as possible for certain areas, you can still test those in your local environment and then push to CI and then push to production or wherever it needs to.
Yes, so wonderful. Really, really just, you can be like one person and do really big things. Okay, thank you so much. Really inspiring thing. I think that people should know more about it, and really, what is a good part of it, that this can be like a Maven part of the Maven cycle life cycle. Is this correct?
Here's another question. I guess some question that some people ask is, can I release to Maven Central using JReleaser? And the answer is no, not at the moment. Releasing to Maven Central requires having a particular set of entries in your XML, in the POM XML, whether it's as Maven or Gradle generated. You have to have a sources and a java.jar. You're releasing binaries. All artifacts need to be signed. The signature has to be registered on a public key server. You have to have an account in Sonatype, and then you publish to a staging repository, and either you automate the publication or you click a release button. So all these things can be done already today with Maven and Gradle. It's just a matter of configuration. So does it make sense for JReleaser to do the same thing? It's a gray area, I would say. Again, it's a little bit of an overlap between the build tool and the release tool. And for the time being, we're concentrated on the areas where JReleaser will excel best, the things that the build tool does not do good or cannot do. And after 1.0, we can look again into maybe it makes sense to release to Maven Central using JReleaser to make the whole release process part of a single tool, but giving you still the option that if you want to use one single tool or in combination with the others, you can still do so. One of the things that I like about JReleaser and the tools that I built is that we don't force you into one single path. I always prefer choices and give you options.
Okay, this is like really lovely. Okay, it's really like two different tools, Maven build tool and release tool. So they overlap, but they are still like, they can one day become like really one tool. Okay, thank you, Andres. So it's really, I would say inspirational for me, because now I have so much stuff I can just automate, which is just gives me free cycles for other jobs. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, really great to be virtually with us on this Joker conference. Really enjoyed your talk. And now we will go to Zoom and see, maybe we have some interaction with the public. So thank you so much for being with us. Really great talk, and see you in Zoom. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you everyone else for joining Joker. And we have more content for you, so stay tuned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.